our webinar today. So Golden Age Village for the Elderly, or GAVE, spelled G-A-V-E, is a nonprofit charity organization. And our goal is to provide long-term care as well as affordable housing to Vietnamese Canadian seniors. GAVE recognizes that most Vietnamese seniors in the GTA speak very little English and report Vietnamese as their spoken language at home. We also recognize that culture is an essential part of the lives of Vietnamese seniors. So GAVE's been working on a project known as 𝗙𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, which will aim to provide long-term care as well as affordable housing for Vietnamese seniors. 𝗙𝗲𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 will provide its services to residents in a way that is reflective of Vietnamese culture. So this includes Vietnamese-speaking staff, as well as Vietnamese-inspired surroundings, such as the food or decor. And if you'd like to learn more about the project or about GAVE as an organization, you can learn more on our website, goldenagevillage.ca. I'll put it in the chat. Oh, that's goldenagevillage.ca. So we have a lot of information on there if you'd like to learn more about us. But aside from that, we can start the meeting. So I'm just going to go over the general structure of this discussion. So first, we're going to get some introductions. Then we're going to go into the discussion about law school. So we'll be first talking about the application process. So the LSAT, for instance, or maintained GPA. And then we'll go on to what law school is actually like. So we'll be talking with our panelists who are law students about the actual experience of being a law school student and being in a law school. And then we'll end by discussing life after law school with an actual practicing lawyer. So let's start off with introductions. So let's introduce our panelists. So we'll start with Jennifer. Jennifer, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. So my name is Jennifer. I'm Jennifer Sun, and I'm going into my second year for law school study at University of Toronto. I did my undergrad at the University of Waterloo. I actually also did a grad studies at University of Pennsylvania and worked as a city planner for a couple of years in Toronto before deciding to come to law school.
Okay, yeah, thanks so much. Hailey, could you go next?
Hi, I'm Hailey. I'm also entering my second year, but at the University of Ottawa. I did my undergraduate degree at McGill University. I double majored in international development studies and sociology. Before law school, I worked for 2 years in the immigration industry, and I currently work at the Crown Attorney's office for the summer.
Okay. Elaine?
Yeah, hi. Same as Jennifer, I'm going into my second year at University of Toronto Faculty of Law. And before I entered law school, I did my bachelor and my master degree in University of British Columbia, majoring in food science.
Okay, Johnathan?
Hi, my name is Johnathan. I'm going into my third year at the University of Ottawa. I have a commerce degree as well as a paralegal diploma. And yeah, I used to work full-time at a corporate immigration firm before going to law school.
Great. And lastly, Beverly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beverly Duong. I'm currently a practicing lawyer in Alberta. For law school, I attended the University of Manitoba for my first year, and then I transferred to the University of Alberta for my last 2 years. I have 2 degrees apart from my law degree. I have a science degree majoring in genetics, and then also a teaching degree.
Okay, great. So I'm already seeing our panelists have a very wide, diverse background. And I'd just like to start the discussion by asking each one of you why you chose law as a career, or why you chose to go into the legal field. So we'll just go in the same order. So Jennifer, why did you choose law as a career path?
Sure. So I think for me, the interest in legal profession actually came from my work as a city planner in Toronto. So for those of you who don't know what city planning does, is the buildings you build, the parks that you see, those sorts of things are really planned by city planner as a bigger skill, and then architects will do that. But as part of this process, regulations, laws from the province and the municipalities are a huge part of the discussion. Often, I was working at a consulting firm for the developers. So often we have to negotiate with the cities and review their legal framework. And I think that process sort of gave me a bit of interest into the legal side aspects of things, especially looking at the language that they use in, for example, city bylaws or provinces regulations. It's so hard for me as a city planner to understand. And every time we always had to go to lawyers. And for me, I just hated the fact that I didn't understand anything, even though it was so related to my work. So I think through that, I thought maybe I can do something for myself to seek a legal intellectual challenge and figure out a way to understand those kind of things, because I really wanted to understand. So I think that was the starting point for me. And then that kind of just took me to the LSAT prep, and here I am at University of Toronto studying law. And I think we might actually get to this later, but I think after a year, I think I made a right decision, because the intellectual stimulation that I'm getting from the school was fabulous, and I really enjoyed it.
So you started off just as a city planner, and then what some people would call legalese is so the legal terms that non-lawyers, I guess, or people not in the legal profession find very confusing. So that actually inspired you to go into law. That's very interesting. Hailey, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I was always very into social justice. And I think being a lawyer, there's a certain power and prestige that comes with it, and that you really have like the opportunity to actually help people and make a difference. So I was very drawn to that. I was also very drawn to like my favorite course in high school was always law, and I really enjoyed debates and just like the litigation aspect of it.
Yeah, I think a lot of students can relate to the social justice aspect. Personally, I also chose to go into law because of high school, my experience in high school learning with law. So that's good to hear. Elaine, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I didn't always want to be a lawyer. And actually, I did research-based master, and it is when I feel like lawyer or law school might be the right path for me. The reason is that even though I enjoy a lot during my grad studies, but I really don't like staying in the lab doing lab work by myself in the middle of the night, and I don't feel like I can see a career path in that sense in the future. So I decided that I'm not going to do a PhD, and instead I'm going to do law school, because I really enjoy presenting my results or discussion, or even negotiating with my principal investigator about what I find. And therefore, I really like the analysis part and the presentation part and oral advocacy in my grad school studies. And therefore, I feel like law school or the lawyer career might be a way that I can demonstrate my interest and also do what I like. Oh, yeah. And one more thing I want to add is actually I'm very shy when I was doing my undergrad. So I would say that even though you are shy, you can still be a lawyer. Like it is not a very big disadvantage for you.
I think a lot of students can appreciate what you just said there, because I think that the general image of a lawyer is someone standing in court in front of like 50 people and presenting some strong argument. I think that can be very daunting for someone like in high school. So that's nice to hear that you don't have to have that confidence, I guess, to succeed. Next would be Johnathan. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, I actually didn't like law when I was younger. So contrary to like everyone else in high school, I actually didn't like law. In university, I predominantly focused on commerce and economics. Like I was really big on numbers and stuff like that. And after I graduated, I actually worked at the Royal Bank for a little bit in their corporate actions department. And I didn't really like it that much. And so I ended up doing the paralegal program, which was only like a year. So it wasn't really a huge commitment. it gave me something to do for the year, and I actually really liked it. So eventually I went on to work at a corporate immigration firm. And I think what ultimately drew me to go to law school was, as you're working, if you're not a lawyer, like if you're working in a law firm, there's certain limitations that you can and can't do as a lawyer, or if you're not a lawyer. And that really bothered me, because as I was working with a lot of these lawyers, it was kind of apparent to me that it was something that I could do, and that I could probably do it better than them. And the only way to do that was if I went to law school, because you need that qualification to become a lawyer. Like, it's just part of the process. So that's ultimately what kind of drew me to go to law school. Not necessarily because I want to be a lawyer, but I just don't like the idea of being limited just because I don't have that education. Like, just because I didn't go to school for 3 years, like, it kind of just bothers me a little why that's kind of a requirement. But that being said, like, I'm not necessarily drawn to the idea of becoming a lawyer, but having a law degree actually opens up a lot more doors outside of law as well. So it's kind of why I went to law school.
Yeah, personally, I'm not a paralegal, although I have been looking into it. I'm very interested in going to paralegal studies. And I think a lot of paralegals can relate to what you said. And I feel like it can be frustrating to be in a position where you feel like you can do something, but you can't, simply because of your position. So that's pretty interesting how that inspired you to go into law. Lastly, we have Beverly. So would you like to go next?
Okay, so I don't have a crazy story about why I chose to go to law school. It sort of just happened because nothing else worked out. So right out of high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I've always thought I was a science person, so I went into sciences and then majored in genetics. It was super interesting, but I didn't see myself working in a lab, and I also didn't want to go to med school or dental school or anything like that. So didn't know what to do with my science degree. Then I decided, you know what, maybe I want to teach. So then I spent another 2 years. I got my teaching degree, only to find out that, hey, I don't want to teach. That's not something I want to do. But throughout this whole time, I was working at a law firm. It was a real estate law firm, and I was a legal assistant throughout the 2 degrees that I did. And then basically, I was doing everything for the lawyer anyway. So I thought, hey, you know what? I can do this as well. So that's how I ended up going to law school. And Jonathan is right. Just because you go to law school, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a lawyer. It does open a lot of doors to many other jobs as well. So not necessarily a lawyer, but you can work for the government, you can work in-house. There are other opportunities as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm noticing that most of us actually didn't choose law as our first, field of study. A lot of us chose other things, mainly in the STEM field, like the sciences, and then didn't see us proceeding in that field and decided to go into law. So that's interesting. I think a lot of students will find that very helpful. So let's move on to the actual application process. First up, we're going to talk about the law school application test, or the LSAT. I feel like a lot of students find the word or the term LSAT, or the test, a lot of people talking about it, maybe some students getting stressed early on about it because it is probably very important. So what would you say is a good way to describe the format of the LSAT? So what is actually on this test?
I guess I can go, yeah. So LSAT, I think this term, like even the law, people who are not interested in law probably heard of it. It's a standardized test for aspiring law students. It's scored on a curve. The total score is 180, which is the highest you can ever get, but it's the rarest. If you ever get a 180, you're probably a genius, to be honest, because it's on the 99.9% percentile, I believe. What it is it's a multiple choice questions divided into previously 4 sections. Now I think it's 3 sections. There are 3 types of questions. One is reading comprehension, which is pretty straightforward. You will get 4 passages. Each set will have 5 to 8 questions, just basically asking you something related to the reading that you did. And then the second type of question is logical reasoning, which is that you will get a short passage, most likely presenting an argument. And then the question will ask you about what the argument is or what the flow of the argument is. For example, what the premise is, the conclusion or assumption that was made in this argument, or ask you to identify if there's any flaw in this argument. This was a section that used to be, I think we were tested on 2 sets, but I think now they're transitioning into only 1 of them. And then thirdly is the analytical reasoning, or people refer to as logical games. This was actually my favorite section, to be honest. It's that you were presented with a set of conditions for each problem set. And you basically were asked a couple of questions in terms of trying to solve. It's almost like filling the puzzles. They will give you like puzzle pieces, and you were just trying to figure out what the missing pieces are. But all of them are very strategic, and you will need a better time to study. But I think that's the basic structure. Oh, one thing I should be mentioning is each section is 35 minutes in total. So it's a very strict time. So I think that's one of the challenge, at least for myself, was I can say it's not necessarily the difficulty of the question, but more so finishing the questions in time.
All right, so you mentioned that it's scored on a special curve. So I believe you get a score between 120 being the lowest and 180, which, as you mentioned, is the highest. There's been a lot of discussion saying like about a cutoff score, or a lot of prep companies for the LSATs advertise a guaranteed 165 plus score, for example. So would you say that there is like a cutoff score for getting into a law school? How important would you say it is? And is there any merit to this 165 plus score pretty much guaranteeing you a spot in a top law school? How would you comment on that?
I guess it really depends. I think is the answer, depending on what it doesn't mean like 165 is a really great score. Like that's definitely a really great one to get into a top law school. But a lot of law school, I think recently are doing more holistic evaluation, especially in Canada. So GPA will be another thing, personal statement, which we'll get into later. So I think this school will be looking at it as a whole package. And I don't think any school is saying there is a specific cutoff for GPA necessarily. It will be a good indicator if the school published their incoming classes range of LSAT scores. So they'll give you a median, which is the middle score that they accepted. And I think 25 percentile and a 75 percentile just give you a sense of the LSATs that they're accepting. It doesn't mean that if you're lower than that, they won't accept you. It's really case by case. So we'll look at you as a whole candidate and see. But I think that kind of published LSAT score from mid and newly mid class will give you a sense of which school you can get into. But otherwise, yeah, I don't believe there's a cutoff necessary, but happy to hear other folks as well.
Yeah, sure. Can I jump in? I honestly think that even though you might have a lower score in your LSAT, you are not out of chance to go to a good law school in Canada, because in Canada, law school, they really take a very holistic approach when looking into your whole application materials. Like, I'm pretty confident to say that because to be honest, my LSAT score is not very stellar, but I still end up in law school. So I mean, LSAT is very important, but it is not a determining factor on whether you can go into law school or not. and also whether you will have a successful legal career or not.
And Elaine, just out of curiosity, you attend U of T Law, correct? So U of T Law, I believe, is a top law school in Canada. So the fact that you can get into a top law school with what she described as a generally low score, I think is very telling of whether there's a cutoff or not. So that's very interesting. And just one more thing I want to ask. So Jennifer, you mentioned that the main problem for you was, or the main obstacle in this test wasn't actually the questions themselves, but rather the time limit of 35 minutes. So how did you study? How long does it take to prepare for this test then? Because it seems that it's not a typical test where you need to read out of a textbook and memorize facts, but you have to work on speed, which is something that we might not all be used to. So how would you recommend preparing for this test? Or how would someone go about studying for this test?
Yeah, of course. And then for me, I was actually under a time, not a time crunch, but when I did the LSAT prep, I was working. So I think that will give you that'll actually be quite a good indicator as to how fast you could go in a way. So for me, I started LSAT prep somewhere in I think April 2019. And I actually took LSAT twice, so one in June, one in July. June, I wasn't ready, I will say that. So that's why I retook it. And July, so between April and June, during the 2 months, I think why I started is I started understanding what the problems, what the category of problems were like. I think for everyone to start, I think you just need to understand what the question types are. For me, I bought the PowerScore like Bible book and then also the official handbook just to get an understanding of what they are like, because those questions are very unique. You've never encountered them before, so you really need to know what they are, what they're asking, what they're trying to do. And then once you get a handle of what those questions are, I think at the end of the day, it's just really practice. I bought the officially released past test sets, which they're all published every time if it's a disclosed test, and then you can actually mark it up and then compare your score to on the curve just to see how you're scoring. I recommend starting with a few recent tests just because the style of the test kind of change over time, just the question. So the older the tests are, I found it a little more harder to read for some reason, but that still adds to the quantity. So when maybe the first couple ones, you don't have to time yourself because then you wanted to finish the test, but I think gradually you want to just time every single 35 minutes just to make sure you can fit it, or if you're not hitting it, see what is your weaknesses. Like for me, reading comprehension was the one that was the slowest for me. So I think I was trying to pick up my reading skills by reading a lot, doing every single exam practice test. And at the end of the day, I think that was what pushed me between the first test and then the second retest. Basically what I did was every day after work, I did a routine, just do at least one, if not 2 to 3 35-minute timed practice tests every day until the day of the next test. And that kind of just gave me the rhythm of every time I'm presented with the material, I know exactly how fast I should be going. And also one tip I will have for everybody when they're on the exam, if you have a question that you get stuck, skip it and come back to it because you don't want to spend time on one question that was the same amount of the mark as the next question that you probably could solve within maybe a minute or even less. So when in doubt, just skip it and come back to it.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that advice. That's very helpful. Just one last thing before we move on about the LSAT. You mentioned that you took it twice. So how does that work? So do law schools take your highest score, or like do they take an average, or does it depend on the law school?
Yeah, when I was applying, I know I heard a lot of rumors about maybe some school will be taking average, some school will be taking highest. I think the trend for the US has always been taking the highest. And then recently I checked U of T's website, at least they actually explicitly stated that they will be generally looking at the highest score as well. But I would caution taking it too many times because while you can retake LSAT anytime, however many times you want, you do have a limit, like only up to three per year. All the scores within the last 5 years will be sent to the law school. So I think it's a question of, say, if you took it 7 times and without very minimal improvement in the score, what does it say about you as a candidate versus those who only say took it once or retake it once or twice with a pretty good score improvement? I think it really shows a different picture about you. So I think be strategic as to if it's worth retaking or not. And if you retake, make sure you can actually increase the score. Even if you didn't increase score for the second one, maybe see if the score is okay actually, and don't maybe think about it if you want to retake the third time and then still landing on the same mark, for example. It is a very expensive test as well. So that's another thing to consider.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification, Jennifer. Let's move on and talk about the transcript or GPA. So Jennifer mentioned that there's really no cutoff. That's mostly a myth. However, it's undeniable that your GPA is still important to your application to law school. You need to have generally, it's important to maintain at least a decent GPA. But at the same time, if you're applying to law school, you need to balance a lot of things in life. So what would you say are some tips to balance a high GPA with other aspects of life? So for example, maybe volunteer work or studying for the LSAT. How would you balance those aspects?
Yeah, I can start off with that. So I'll say that for your GPA, it is more important to choose the right courses that you think you are good at and that you can get good grades, rather than choosing courses that you think it is related to law. Because for me, personally, actually during undergrad and during my master, I didn't take any art courses aside from economics and also scientific English writing. All of my other courses are pure science, and because those are courses that I love, that I'm good at doing, and therefore I can maintain a good GPA. And I feel that, as I mentioned before, Canadian law schools take a really holistic approach when looking into your application materials. So if you know that you are not as strong as in your LSAT test, then you should try to maintain a very good GPA. In terms of allocating your personal life with the LSAT test or the getting a good grades in undergrad, I would say that try to focus on studying for LSAT during the summer. If I were you as an undergrad student, because this is what I did before I entered law school. I just spent like 3 months do intensive studying and then go to take my LSAT test, sorry. And I will say that when you have no other distraction and just focus on doing one thing, it is actually one of the best way to get good LSAT score. And also one last thing is that in terms of like extracurricular activities or like part-time job, I will say that it is very important that you have something that you are doing aside from studying during your undergraduate studies as well. Because for law school admission office, they don't want to just see that you are good at study. They want to see that you are good at multitasking as well. So if you have very good GPA, very good LSAT score, but you actually have no part-time jobs or no extracurricular activities, they might be wondering, oh, then why you want to go to law school? It is hard to write your personal statement without having other life experience as well. So I would say that, yeah, just try your best in your bachelor studies, do what you are good at. And don't worry if you are doing like science courses, because I'm a demonstration to you that even though you do a very science undergrad degree, you can still go to law school.
Yeah, I think a lot of students have this tendency to believe that you have to go into some kind of law-related undergrad when you're in an undergrad. So, for example, a lot of political science majors or some kind of pre-law program. So I think it's nice to hear that you can go into something that you just find interesting, or like you said, something you feel like you'd be good at, and that'll work out for you. And just one more quick question: would you say that law schools, consider that at all? Like, would you say that someone from a unique discipline would have an advantage? Do you think that that would let them stand out? So, for example, someone that, such as yourself, in a science program, I'd say, most people applying to law school are in political science. Would you say that if you're in another major, would you stand out? Would that actually give you an advantage?
I will say that every law school want to show that they are very diverse and inclusive as well. So obviously they won't take like 100% of students coming from a political science degree or like a pre-law program. And when you look at U of T Faculty of Law website, you can actually see that the demographic for class of 2023 is actually 20% science student and 20% from student coming from business school. So I don't think that taking a particular bachelor degree will actually help you in going to law school. It more comes down to your GPA, to your LSAT, and also comes down to your personal statement, which I think it is very important to have a very good personal statement when applying for law school.
So it sounds to me that actually one of the more important parts of this application is the personal statement. So that's very interesting. We'll touch on that in a bit, but first I want to move on to the topic of reference letters. So part of your application to some law schools is obtaining a letter of reference. So from a prof, someone from academics or from your school, or some law schools may request maybe someone from outside of academics, so like from your work or volunteer. So Hailey, what can you tell us about asking for reference letters? So how many reference letters are required? Does it vary by the law school? And what are some tips for obtaining a reference letter should you need one?
Yeah, so reference letters is dependent on the law school you apply to. I believe most of the Ontario law schools will ask for them. I know U of T doesn't require any, but it is like optional. If you want to submit them, you might as well, especially if you already have them for other schools you're applying for. I believe most of the schools, and Western in particular, they actually do mention that they prefer academic references. And then for some schools, it's actually mandatory that you do have an academic reference letter. And the exception is if you're applying as a mature student and it's been too many years since you've been in school, then you can provide a work reference instead of an academic reference. I believe Windsor law actually requires one non-academic reference letter. So you would have one academic, one non-academic. When I applied, I actually had 3 reference letters. I believe in one of the schools, I think it was Western, they said they'll just look at the first 2 reference letters that they see rather than like looking at more than 2. But other schools, they will look at more than 2. Who to ask? Usually I would ask a professor that you've done well in the class. Preferably, I was kind of strategic about it towards the end of my undergrad. I knew that eventually I would probably want to apply for law school. So I took a bunch of seminar classes. And then I also did a research paper with a professor just to have in mind that I'm going to ask this professor for a reference letter. So sometimes I also you can also take the same prof more than more than 1 year in your undergrad. So then like the prof kind of has a knows you and stuff. But from what I've been told from admissions officers at law schools is that it's less about the credentials of the person writing the reference letter, but how well this person knows you. So you don't need to get some like big name professor. It could be like a new professor who knows you really well and who can like attest to your abilities. So that type of reference letter would stand out more than I remember an event I attended, the admissions officer was saying someone had gotten like Justin Trudeau to write their reference letter for law school. And they were like, that's impressive, but like, you don't need to do that. Like, you just have to get someone who knows you well. I would also advise that like, if the professor isn't completely like happy to write your reference letter, don't use them, because everyone's reference letter is going to be glowing. Everyone's going to have a really good reference letters. So if a professor is kind of, if you can get the vibe that they're kind of iffy about writing the reference letter for you, just make sure you give them an out. Say like, oh, I know you're too busy, or if you don't feel comfortable, like you don't have to write one for me, because the worst thing you can get is a really lukewarm, mediocre reference letter when everyone else's is really positive. And it's really important to give your someone who you're asking a lot of time. I would say at least ask 1 month in advance, because professors are so busy, like they're going to need the time to write a reference letter. I think it's also more extensive than just like a page of the reference letter. I know like one of my references for work, she had showed me like what the process was for the reference letters. They actually ask a bunch of questions, and then they ask them like for the law school process, they actually ask your references to rate you on a scale of 1 to 10 on different things, like how well do you know the student, how well is this, like how well is the student at like whatever skills or something. So like, yeah, it's really important to have a good reference. And some references, they might ask to see your personal statement and transcript so they can get a better idea of how they should tailor your reference letter. So I would have that ready before I ask for a reference. Yeah, and then at the end, I think it's also important to thank your references for the reference letter that you provided and to update them on like how the results of your application.
Oh, that's actually very useful information. Thank you so much for all of that advice. Just one follow-up question. You mentioned that the most important part of a reference letter is not where you got it from, but how well the reference knows you, or the person giving the letter actually knows you. Does that tie in with Elaine's earlier comment about the field of study? Would you say that the actual field of study of, let's say, a professor, or if you're getting a reference from an actual lawyer as opposed to someone from another field or source, would you say that that plays any part in how strong your reference letter is? Or is it just mainly what professor knows me the best in deciding who to ask for a reference letter?
So I think it depends on the content of your reference letter. If you can get a lawyer who you worked with to write a reference letter, obviously that would be the best choice, but not everyone has that opportunity. So more important of getting someone who, if you're just getting like, say, your law professor who doesn't even remember you because the class was like over 100 people, they're not going to be writing that great of a reference letter for you. They're going to say like, yeah, this is a good student, but then they can't like attest to you like personality wise and like in more depth. So I think it's more important to get like a reference letter that can stand out because like the person knows you well.
Yeah, I can add on that. Like for me, I got my reference letter from 2 professors who are also from food science as well, and they don't have any legal background, obviously. But I got my reference letter from them, or I asked them for one because I get along with them very well. I know that they really know about my personality, my soft skills. It is someone that I am confident enough that they will give me a good reference letter.
Okay, thanks so much, Elaine and Hailey, for that information about reference letters. So let's move on to the next section. So next, let's talk about the personal statement. So we've mentioned this a few times during this event already, and I think we're all in agreement that it's very important. So how would you say the personal statement actually looks like? So what is the actual structure of the personal statement, and how long should you take to write the personal statement?
Yeah, I think this is mine. Yeah, so for personal statement, I think the structure-wise, I don't know if there is a really concrete structure, but it's really how you tell your story. I think it's at the end of the day what's important. I'll just talk about the length a little bit. So there will be generally character or less limit to a personal statement depending on the school. So I think for U of T, it was 5,000 characters, including space and punctuations. And then I think for U Ottawa, it's 8,000. So you can already see between the schools that you actually will be writing a slightly different personal statement. It's not necessary to say you need to hit the mark. Like you don't need to hit a 5,000, of course, but I think it gives you a general idea of how long they're expecting. And I always want to hit like closer to that range because I think that's what they were looking for. So with that in mind, I think it's your opportunity to showcase who you are. Why do you want to be a law student? Why law? And this is really where you, beyond the scores, beyond GPA, beyond LSAT, beyond your resume, you can actually talk about what's your strengths, what's your academic, professional, or extracurricular experience that really make you the best or a great candidate to become a law student at the particular school that you're writing for. Because if you do your research, each school is known for slightly different things. So social justice, or like if you like corporate law, I think you might actually get a slightly different options as to where you want to be a law student. So with that in mind, this is the first piece of writing that you will be writing for law school. That's persuasive, trying to make an argument in a way that gives the admission committee an impression like this student has what it takes to become a great law student and at the end of the day, a great lawyer. And also to keep in mind that every year, each admission committee will be receiving thousands of applications with everyone with probably a really great personal statement. So you have to be strategic and think about what makes you stand out. It doesn't have to be law related. It could be your background that you think will contribute to the legal profession as a whole or law school. I think for me, I remember my background, because I actually lived in a couple of Asian countries before coming to Canada and then all that. So I actually talked about how that kind of background made me open-minded, adaptable, which is something you want to have as a lawyer because you will be meeting with so many different clients from so many different backgrounds, so with different interests. So that kind of soft skills is something, if you can actually communicate that's something that you can contribute and you're good at, it is worthwhile mentioning, even though it's not related to like study or like professional experience or even extracurricular, but it makes you stand out. And that's something that the law school is really looking towards, especially recent years. I found that diversity inclusion is something that they always wanted to get to have, getting different perspective, because if you have a student body with only one single opinion, one single background, I don't think that makes it a very interesting class or even helpful at all, because no one can provide a different perspective to solve a problem, which is what the legal profession is. And then I think I just quickly add, if the school that you're applying are also asking for optional essays, which is optional, like you don't have to write it, but if you decide to write those optional essays, think about what you can write in those and then versus personal statement, because the last thing you want is to be redundant in your two essays. So personal statement should be read on its own and packaged you the best. But optional essays is targeted questions, something that you couldn't fit it into your personal statement because there was a character limit. Then that's an opportunity to supplement a personal statement. But I think personal statement is the key. And then in terms of the prep, start early. It's not like you will be studying as much, you will spending as much as you're preparing for LSAT, but I think I started my personal statement as early as my prep, because you will be rewriting it, revising it, ask different people to read it, who's not even a lawyer, who's not even a law student, or even just who's not even like too close to the like a academic field, just to see if they can get the vibe from what you were writing, and just take time. I think this is one of the most important pieces of application material that will make you a really great candidate.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm just going to ask one more question, and anyone can answer this, by the way. So you mentioned that it's your first persuasive paper for law school. Would you say that it's more so arguing this is why I should be in law school for reasons A, B, and C, or would you say it's more of just writing just about this is who I am and these are my interests and why I want to go to law school? So what would you say to that, anybody?
Yeah, I'll just, since I started, I'll start and then see if everyone else is, because I think this actually really depends on the personal statement we wrote for ourselves. I think mine actually fell on the latter category. I began telling a story about myself, my transition, and then kind of talked about why I want to become a lawyer. And then at the end, it kind of just wrapped in the skill sets that I had that makes me a good lawyer as well, in addition to the journey that I had to this day that made me want to apply for law school. But yeah, I actually am interested to see if everyone else has have a different opinion.
I just wanted to also add in that for the personal statement, it's also very important that you're catering them to the school that you're applying for. And that if you're using a template, like make sure you're changing the names of the schools. Like from what I've heard from admissions officers is that that's like the #1 most common mistake, is that people are using templates and they're not changing the name of the schools. And that pretty much just kills your chance at the school you're applying to.
Same as Jennifer, I also write my personal statement, just like telling my personal story. And I actually think it is a smarter approach as compared to like just pinpointing why you want to go to law school, like argument 1, argument 2, argument 3, because admission officers read a lot of cover letters and you want them to be memorable for your specific one. It is not a science research paper. You don't have to like explain every reasons that you want to go to law school, but they want to know who are you, why you're interested in law school, and also your special background, because Canadian universities really emphasize on maintaining their law school as a diverse and inclusion community as well. So make sure in your personal statement, try to tell your story, show that why you're special and what is unique about you.
Okay, thank you so much. Unless anyone else has anything else to add about personal statements, considering it's very important, we can move on to the final section of the law school application, which would be the sketches and verifiers, or listing your experience. So so what are some kinds of experience that are listed here? Is there anything in particular that could make you stand out, or maybe something that law schools look for? And also, what are some good ways to obtain experience in general as a undergrad student or someone looking to go to law school?
Yeah, so the sketches and verifiers is pretty much like every extracurricular or like part-time job that you've had through law school. I honestly just put every single thing I did on there. There's no limit to it. Actually, I think there is a limit to it, but it's like something like, it's like 20 experiences or something like really high. And make sure for each experience, you actually you need to have a reference with the contact number, but they honestly don't I don't think they contacted any of my references, but it's kind of just like in case, so they can verify that you did in fact do this like extracurricular or whatever. It doesn't have to be law related. I think what's more important is how many hours per week you're spending on it, which shows like how passionate and dedicated you are to the experience and like to extracurriculars. They do ask like how many hours you spend per week on the activity. If you really want to gain law school experience, like the pre-law society would be probably like your best bet in undergrad for it. But I personally found it really hard to find any like law related experience to do, just because like for law students, like in first year, that's like hard for law students to begin with. So for undergrads coming from like nothing, like there's not really any firms that would really want to take you on. But if you have that, like that would be amazing experience. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If anyone else has anything to add.
I just want to add that if you don't have any legal related extracurricular activities, try to do a research assignment with a professor or something, because for law school, it really want to see people who have like a innovative mindset. And therefore doing the research really helps you to gain attraction for your personal statement right out, for having a unique research topic. And also they will see that, oh, this person will probably succeed in law school because she thinks very innovatively or creatively. And actually in law school, it is some of the factor that is important.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's just move on because it looks like we're going short on time. So let's just go to the next section. So now we'll talk about being a law student or being part of a law school. So what are some surprises that you've faced, or some things you weren't expecting when you became a law student?
Honestly, being a law student isn't a whole lot different than just being a student, right? It's still school, you're still there to learn. I think what you hear a lot about law school is like there's a lot of reading, you know, you get like hundreds of pages every day. Personally, and this will actually depend on what school you go to and like what profs you get. But I actually didn't find it to be that much. I know a lot of people would probably disagree with me. I didn't find, like, I remember I counted how many pages I had to read for a week, and it was like 300 to 400 for the week though. So it's really all about time management. I think the biggest thing that differentiates law school from your undergrad or from any other school is that there's a higher expectation of responsibility on you because you're older, you've already gone through undergrad, you've already sort of are at this stage in your life where you get more responsibility. And so it's really how you manage your time for all of these readings, because, you know, if you find that you're taking too long to do all of the readings, and you're overwhelmed, I think you really have to sort of reflect on why you're taking long, like what are you doing that's sort of slowing you down and things like that. It's really just how to manage your time to see how long everything takes. Like, I think in my first year, what I did was I counted how long it would take me to do a reading for each class. And then based off that, I just made my schedule for like a week on how many hours I would read a week. Again, a lot of law students might disagree. I actually had a lot of free time in my first year. I know Hailey would disagree with 1L, our first year being like that, but I had a lot of free time. And I still got through a lot of my readings. I still did pretty well actually in my first year. But in terms of surprises, honestly, I think they say first year of law school is the hardest. And the reason why it is the hardest for the future is because when you're applying for jobs at the end of your second year summer, they actually mainly look at your first year grades, because you have to apply for those jobs either before your second year starts or during your second year of law school. So they don't actually get your second year grades. So they only look at your first year grades. So you really want to do the best in your first year of law school. Every law school has the same courses. It's always those basic contracts, torts, criminal law. Every law school does those same first year courses. So it's easier to compare all of the students if it's just based off your first year grades. That being said, finding a job for your second year of law school, like if you do poorly in your first year of law school, it's not the end of the world. There's a saying where like C students make the best lawyers, like B students are like judges, and like A students are like researchers and stuff. Whereas like, yeah, so the best students are actually end up being like C students. But it's really not the end of the world if you do poorly in your first year, or you just have to kind of do a bit better in your second year if you're looking for jobs. And ultimately, there's a lot of chances for you to sort of improve throughout your law school. So if you don't actually get a job in your second year of summer, there's also, you apply for articling like the year later. So there's actually multiple steps where you apply for jobs for the future. It's just a lot easier if you can get a job in your second year summer, because then your articling position is kind of guaranteed and you don't have to worry about it in your third year, and you can kind of just have fun and enjoy yourself. So really the first year is kind of the one that you want to do the best. And it's usually the most stressful because you have to sort of adapt to that law school life, and the content of law, if you're not used to it, it's kind of confusing. It's confusing to a lot of people, even lawyers. It's confusing to them, and they're lawyers. So you kind of have to be really fluid in your understanding of it. If you're really like black and white, then in terms of how you understand stuff, it'll be really tough, because you'll basically learn that this is the law, but then this is an exception, and this is an exception to the exception, and it won't apply if this is here at all. So you kind of just have to take it for what it is, instead of dwelling a lot during first year, where I find a lot of new students kind of get stuck on that. So it's really just how well you'll adapt and how well you kind of understand the materials and things like that.
Yeah, personally, I think it's very reassuring that you said that you didn't encounter many surprises. Personally, I don't like surprises. I like to know that I like to know what I'm getting into. So I think it's very reassuring that it was mostly what you expected. And I also wanted to just ask one thing, and anyone can jump in on this. So you said that your first year is most important because it helps you find a summer job, and then the summer jobs then help you with your articling. So what are all of these terms? So what is articling? What do you mean by like finding a summer job every year? Is that just you just search on your own, or is there some kind of system with the school that you have to go through?
Yeah, so to become a lawyer, there are three things that you have to do. You have to go to law school. You have to write the bar exam, which is just this big exam. And you have to article, which is essentially a type of internship that you do for about 10 months. And once you finish all of that and you pass everything, then you become a lawyer. And so within law school, there's really only 2 summers that you'll have to work, because at the end of law school, once you graduate, you're going to write the bar exam usually in that summer, so you're not going to work. So there's 2 summers. You're after your first year of summer and your second year of summer. In the first year, if you don't find a job, it's not really the end of the world. Actually, a lot of people will tell you your first year summer, if you don't work, it's fine. Like, you should actually enjoy that summer. But the second year summer is where you actually want to do something. So if you're going to work, it was a little different with COVID. Like, my University of Ottawa offered summer courses. So I know some people took summer courses. Usually they don't offer that. So it's just kind of a COVID response. But typically in Canada, there's a structured recruitment process for law students to find jobs. And typically within this recruitment process are a lot of the big name law firms that you'll hear about. A lot of like the downtown Toronto law firms, there's like the Seven Sisters is the name of these 7 biggest law firms in downtown Toronto. I think it's like an old name that they had, but there's a recruitment process and it's really structured. So there's a lot of deadlines. I think that it's now. The deadlines are right now for those people who are applying. And it's really rigid. So you essentially have to submit all of your application material for whatever law firms you pick for the specific date, specific time. And they're called OCI, so they're on-campus interviews. So typically what happens is if you get picked, or this is how they used to do it before COVID, essentially there would be a day, 2 days where every single law firm that is part of this recruitment process, they're in this convention hall. And each law firm is separated by like a sheet. So it's like little cubicles, and each interview is 17 minutes. So if you get an interview, you get 17 minutes, you go in, you do your interview, and then if you have another interview, you just go to the next one, and it's 17 minutes each, and it's like they'll cut you off at 17 minutes. It's really strict because it's so time sensitive. And if you're able to get one of these on-campus interviews and you get through the whole process, you actually get an in-firm interview where you actually get to go to the firm and you'll go to like their office and do an interview. If you're able to get a job through this on-camp like this process, you'll get your second year summer job, and typically they'll keep you for the articling. So you're kind of set until you become a lawyer, assuming you pass everything. If you fail everything, that's kind of that's on you to pass. But with that being said, if you don't get, so it's actually really limited in the positions that are offered through this process, the structured recruitment, just because there's only so many law firms that are hiring, and it's basically every single, like any student across Canada can apply to it as long as they're in their second year of law school or going to their second year of law school. So you're competing against basically every school. So it's actually really competitive. If you don't get a job through that process, you know, a lot of law firms hire outside of the structured recruit, so you can find a job through there. And as well as there's an articling recruitment, a structured articling recruitment that happens is like the end of your second year. So like in May. So it actually is well, for me, for my year, because of COVID, it was really stressful because our on-campus interview process was like February, March. And then in May is the articling recruit. So it's like basically you're just nonstop writing cover letters and doing interviews and stuff. Whereas the normal process for Toronto is now. So you would apply for Toronto jobs for your second year summer right now before you even started your second year, which is why your first year law grades are kind of all they really see, and everything that you did during your first year law school before that. So there's a lot of ways to find jobs for the summer. If you don't find a job in the summer, it's not the end of the world. I think the biggest thing is just to network and meet people, and they'll help you get jobs down the line, honestly. The structured recruit, personally, having gone through it, doesn't make sense. It's a weird process, and there's no formula to it. Like you don't know what each firm is looking for. It's actually really random. A lot of people say grades, so your grades do matter, but you don't have to be an A student. You absolutely don't have to be an A student. I've seen people with like mostly with the B average end up at like a top law firm in Toronto. So it's really, you'll hear this a lot. It's about the fit and how they see you fitting in with that firm's culture, but you won't actually know what the firm's culture is. So it's kind of, it's a lot of luck. And so networking is probably your best bet because it helps you get your name into their minds before the process, and then they'll like see the name again and be like, oh wait, I do know this person, like I talked to them. They're really cool. Like if you can volunteer with the firm beforehand, or it's even better because then they'll actually know how you work. But yeah, it's really not the end of the world. I think if you don't get an articling position, or that's kind of where it gets a little tricky, because articling is like you need an articling position, whereas you don't need a summer job. So but you don't have to really worry about that until like a lot later in law school. I think the main focus is just do really well in your first year, you know, join clubs, do things that interest you, and like get good grades and like just meet people. I think is probably the best thing to do in law school. So
I think a lot of students will find a lot of what you said very valuable. So I feel like when you think about the how a lot of people go about law school, it might seem very black and white to some and very daunting. So get 2 summer jobs and then go to articling, take the bar, have a certain GPA. So I'm glad that you touched on the flexibility of going about law school. And in a way, I feel like it's very reminiscent to the actual law school application itself, in terms of how, you know, just because you may have a low GPA doesn't mean you're guaranteed going to be screwed, basically. So I think it's very reassuring that we touched on that. So thank you so much, Johnathan. Let's just move on to our final section of this discussion. And these questions are mostly going to be for Beverly, and they're going to be relating to life after law school. So Beverly, you are a lawyer, correct? So what would you say is the most enjoyable part about being a lawyer?
Well, I really enjoy being able to help my clients and being able to make a difference in people's lives. That's generally a pretty good feeling. And to me, that's the best part of being a lawyer. There's also never a dull day. Every day is different and it just keeps work interesting.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to ask, so lawyers have this reputation of being very stressed, and you know they have to work long hours. They generally the profession is seen as being very stressful. Is there any merit to these claims? And if so, how would you recommend handling stress?
Okay. There is, but it also really depends. So being a lawyer can be very stressful, but the amount of stress really depends on what type of law you're practicing, your pay structure, so whether you're on salary, commission, or a combination of, and then the size of the law firm that you're working in. I mainly have a solicitor's practice, and I chose that for a reason, and I chose a smaller firm as well. And that allows me to have a work-life balance. I go to work at 9:30, I go home at 4:30. I don't take any work home with me. I don't work on the weekends. That's different for my coworkers that are in the family area or criminal, where they're doing a lot of litigation. They're working for a bigger firm. You have the pressure of billing, you know, $500,000 a year. So, and especially if you're paid on just commission, you only get paid when you work. So it really depends. For me, I think it's really important to just stay active, try to eat healthy, and kind of just take care of yourself. Otherwise, it's really, really easy to burn out in the profession. And that does happen a lot of the times. There's a huge dropout for lawyers in the first 5 to 10 years.
Okay, thank you so much, Beverly. One final question before we move on to the Q&A. So I know that this question definitely varies depending on your area of law, but for your area, what would you say are some things that are typical of a regular day of work, or like some things that might be unexpected?
Okay, well, my typical day starts around 9:30. It's pretty late for most people. I'm usually busy closing real estate transactions prior to noon. I don't really see clients in the morning if I don't have to. Then I normally have lunch, and then after I'll have my client meetings. If I'm not meeting with clients, then I'll be working on mortgages or drafting wills and whatnot. And then my day kind of just ends at 4:30, and that's when I go home. So it's pretty laid back for me.
I think that's very reassuring because I feel like the last thing that someone would think about when thinking of a lawyer is being, like laid back or having a lot of free time or having time to actually balance other aspects of life. So I think it's very reassuring that at least in your field, there is room for, actually having a
life.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it's also important to, ask for help when you need help and learn how to delegate your work to other people. Yeah. Otherwise, you just burn out.
Okay. Thank you so much, Beverly, and everyone for this great advice and this very valuable discussion. Let's move on to the Q&A. So I'm just going to go to the doc and ask a few questions that anyone can answer. So let's just look through the list here. So I'll ask this question. This is the first question. How has your cultural background or ethnicity impacted your law career?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I will say good things about that. For me, I'm actually an international student from Hong Kong. So English is obviously not my first language. But because of that, actually this summer, I got into some very interesting opportunities. For example, I volunteer in a clinic right now and do client intake for Cantonese speaking and also Mandarin speaking client. And also I work in an online legal marketplace right now, orienting my work as to recruiting Chinese client or Chinese international student who are thinking to come to Canada to study. And therefore I will say that for your ethnicity, don't feel like it is a disadvantage. And once again, as I mentioned, Canadian law school wants to be viewed as a diverse and inclusive community. So they will actually take any ethnicity students to their law school as well. And think about it as your advantage as well. And if you want to, you can write it into your personal statement. But I believe for some Canadian law school, they actually have a separate paper to write on telling them what else you want to show your uniqueness. And I remember for that document, I write about I'm an international student from Hong Kong and how my past living in Hong Kong actually shaped me right now. And I guess if you have something that you can talk for your ethnicity, make sure you write it into your application materials because I think that it will actually help you.
Yeah, I think considering that, especially the personal statement is literally a story of who you are, I think your background would be very important. And I think talking about how your background plays into your interest in law or maybe a specific area of law is very helpful. So the next question, a bit of a longer one. So let's read word for word. I work at a senior center. We have an older lady in her early 60s with her undergraduate degree taking place 30 years ago. Her lifelong dream is law school. She's worried about not getting accepted based on her age, and second, feeling isolated in the classroom with the age difference. And she's also worried about what law firm would hire her at age 65 or even have an article with some firm. So she would like to know about older people getting into law school. Are there any seniors in law school?
Yeah, so every law school, I believe almost every of them, they have a mature student category for people who have been out of school for like, I think 5 years. So there are older people in law school. I haven't seen any seniors at 𝗚 but there are definitely like parents, people who are in their like mid 30s, like maybe 40s. So it's definitely possible. The law firms, like, I think it would, like, you don't need to be like for articling and like to work, you don't need to like work on like one of those pastry firms or something. Like you could even like go into sole practitioners or like small boutique firms where they may be more open to like hiring someone with more work experience.
Yeah, and just to add to Hailey's point, I think pastry firms will probably not something that an older lady will want to as well. I think it just generally it will be stressful hours. Even like for us, we'll be having some trouble with the long hours. And I think when they, I think at an older age, maybe it is considering sole practitioner or smaller firm when you can actually take at your own pace, space it out. Because I'm assuming for a lady like this, it's about the law school, law practice in general. It's not necessarily about, for example, students. We have to pay off our student debt from like a couple years ago. So, like we have other motivators that's driving us to maybe a corporate practice more so. So it is really depends on the interest level. I'm sure, given that the law school provides opportunity for them, I'm sure there are other law firms out there that may be willing to consider different experiences.
I also forgot to mention the mature student category. They'll focus less on your GPA and your undergrad grades, and they'll focus more on your work experience.
Okay, thank you so much, Hailey and Jennifer. That was very good. The next question is, how much money does it cost to attend law school, and how should I support myself financially? Or alternatively, what are some options to obtain funding or a loan to get into law school, should you need it?
How much it costs actually depends on what law school you go to. U of T is the most expensive, by far the most expensive law school. University of Ottawa is actually not that much. I mean, it's a lot, but it's a lot less than U of T. I think we paid around like 20,000 last year.
I just saw the bill for mine, and it's over 18,000 for this school year.
Yeah, so ours is like 18,000. I think U of T is like over 30, close to 40. So it really depends on what school you go to. I actually think UBC is really cheap from what I remember. UBC in Vancouver is a lot less than all of these Ontario schools. Ontario schools are just expensive because it's like money. How to support yourself? I mean, if you're an Ontario student, OSAP, you can still get OSAP for law school. I think I got OSAP last year and it covered pretty much my whole tuition, almost. You can work part-time. Again, it's how you manage your time. Like I have friends who worked during law school during their first year and they did fine. It's really how you manage your time. You can definitely work. Or yeah, just take out loans and pay it off later when you become a lawyer. I think that's really the main two things.
Yeah, just to expand on that, law students get like a professional student line of credit where your prime rate will be better than like just a regular loan. So for the line of credit, law students, I think it's like you get $130,000 for 4 years. There's like an allocated amount of how much you can take out per year. But with that, like combined with OSAP, like it'll cover everything. Even if you don't get OSAP and you just use your line of credit, like it'll cover everything.
Yeah. And then just from USG's perspective, yes, we are unfortunately one of the highest tuition schools, but just do not let that distract you from applying to UFT is what I want to say, because I think UFT specifically, they have a bursary program for students. It's financial aid based, so it's not about your merits, it's not about your GPA. It's really about your financial situation. So depending on your parents' income, yourself, they have a formula that really provides enough support for a student who actually cannot support themselves financially. For me, obviously, I didn't get the benefit because I worked myself, but I know at least my classmates, my friends, they had the benefit of that. And that kind of just at least dropped the tuition level to a more so average relatively compared to other schools in Ontario.
Yeah, I think debt's debt. Regardless of what school you go to, you'll if you're supporting yourself, you'll have some amount of debt. So you should really just pick the school that you want to go to, regardless of the financial factors, because like you'll pay it off. Like once you're a lawyer and you're working, you'll pay it off eventually. It's really not the end of the world if you have a lot of debt. I mean, unless if you're going to go to the school in the US, then yeah, your debt's going to be like 10 times as much. But yeah, debt's debt. Like you'll pay it off eventually. It's not a big deal.
Okay, thank you so much. We're running a bit short on time, so I'll just ask this question quickly. And this goes to the panelists working, the panelists who had worked or studied in a different field before entering law school. The question is, what are your opinions on entering law school right after undergrad, as opposed to taking time off to gain work experience or something else?
So you can, like, there are people who go straight from undergrad to law school. I was surprised that in my small group, there were more people who took time off and got work experience. I think in my small group, out of like 26 people, there was like 5 or less people who went straight from like undergrad to law school. I think it really benefits you and your personal statement having work experience. And I think most of all, it's important to know which field of law you want to do. So like, for example, like when, like initially I thought I wanted to do immigration law, which is why I worked in immigration. And it made me realize like, that's actually not what I want. And I'm so glad like I took the time off, and it really helped. Like I was able to pay off my student loans in the time that I took off after undergrad. And then to know like, okay, this isn't a field that I potentially like want to try out. But if you like are set and you know law is what you want, and you know which field of law you want to go into, and your grades are good enough, and then you're able to get in right away, like there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't think it would disadvantage you like in any way.
Okay, thank you so much, Hailey. Let's just go through one more question on here. So to the panelists who have a science undergrad / background, how did you use it to your advantage in your personal statement? And how has it contributed to any of your success in law school? So there's another question.
I'll say that,
oh, sorry.
for me, my personal statement, I focus less on what I actually do in the science sector. I actually took a perspective on starting my personal statement by telling a story about how I help a student in like a lab class to get fairness grading from a professor, and then flowing my personal statement from there. And at the end, talking about because I did a major in food science, right? So I talk about I really want to help farmers in Canada to seek for like social justice and fair trade as well. So I would say that even though you have a science background, you always have something to say. Either it is of soft skills, but I will say that try to limit pinpointing what you actually do in the science field, because the admission officers might not understand those specific science terms anyways. And also, if you couldn't find anything in your science study that you would like to write in your personal statement, try to think about what happens in your part-time work or your extracurricular activities, and try to think about like a moment or a story that you can tell to show that you're interested in law. So what I would say overall is that having a science study doesn't limit you to go to law school, because life is so long and so big for like at least 4 years. In that 4 years, there must be some moment that you can link in your personal statement and show an interest in law and also the law school.
Thanks so much, Elaine. That was a very good answer. One final question that we have here this is for anyone. So what is a pre-law society? The term has been brought up a few times. So what do you mean when you say pre-law society?
I guess I'll answer since I was the one who said it. So in undergrads, there's a club called like pre-law. It's for people who are in undergraduate, like in their undergrad, and they have intentions of attending law school. So I get like, they're kind of like keeners because they're like, I want to go to law school. So I'm like gonna join the society that's like law related. And then I'm guessing they host events and stuff. To be honest, like I didn't join the pre-law society. But I think it's just like, oh, like you have an interest in law, so then you attend because you know this is going to be your future. And then they host like events with like lawyers and like law school related like socials and stuff.
Thank you so much, Hailey. I believe that was our final question. So unless anyone has anything else to add, we'll conclude the event. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming to the event. We have a survey that we would like you all to complete. It'll take less than a minute. It's just 5 questions. 𝗪𝗍 does events like this every year. So we're just looking for feedback on how we can improve or some things that we did well. So anything like that would be very appreciated. So thank you so much. So please fill that out if you can. It's in the chat, the Google form. And of course, a special thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time to come here and answer all these questions and give some really valuable advice, despite the fact that they're probably very busy. So thank you so much to all of you panelists. And I believe we've touched on everything. So that concludes the event. So thanks so much, everyone. And yeah, have a great day.